So I'm really happy to welcome you to the seminar, interdisciplinary seminar that we have been holding already for quite some time now, and there are a lot of different topics, and now we're kind of getting inevitable kind of topics on the generative AI, which was actually contacts which was made during this interdisciplinary conference in Estonia last year, where I was really happy to learn a bit more about your work. And yeah, floor is yours, David. Thanks a lot for taking time to give a seminar, and looking forward.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. I mean, obviously, for some of you, it might be a little bit of a repetition because, I mean, I added a few slides in the end, but there's a lot of basically the same than what I also presented. But I think, as you said, I also want to give a little bit of a background of like what we generally thinking about at the Center of Humans and Machines. So like what are our research agenda essentially, so that will be the first part. It was already the first part in the CUDA conference. And then I'm talking a little bit about like some ongoing work where we use kind of Stable Diffusion to understand a little bit like how maybe creativity evolved in time. And yeah, it's very much an ongoing project. We're still playing around, I think, and trying to kind of bring together the puzzle pieces to kind of make some kind of bigger thing in the end. Hopefully, that at least is the goal. But yeah, I think even the puzzle piece I'm presenting might be already interesting. So I think that's why it's worth talking about it. And I'm also very much looking forward to like your thoughts. I know that you work a lot on embeddings and have like maybe a little bit of a different perspective on this kind of work than maybe our perspective. So maybe before I start, actually, I don't know if you're all familiar with the Center of Human Machines, probably not. So maybe it's actually useful for me to kind of give a short introduction about me, maybe a few sentences, and then the center before I like kind of jump into the talk. Just I guess it could be interesting. So I'm back, my background in physics, and then I worked a little in the industry as a data scientist essentially. And then I thought like, actually I want to do that a little bit like kind of more fundamental what I'm doing there. And like basically I was building a system where like human stylists and like would interact with the reinforcement learning, with the recommender engine essentially. And I was really interested in this kind of interplay of like humans and AI and how this co-evolution between different learning systems. And then I thought, yeah, let's kind of do a little bit more thorough research on this question. Now, the Center of Humans and Machine is like essentially like one of the centers of the Max Planck Institute for Human Development and in Berlin. And we are looking at like basically trying to anticipate how AI impacts society, like how intelligent machines or like AI in general, like will change the way we play, we govern, we kind of all our lives essentially. And what I think is very special about the center specifically, that we really like a very interdisciplinary place. I think I've never seen like a lab which has so many different disciplines under one roof. So we have people from like computer science, physics, economics, social science, law, probably I missed something, but like, and usually from all this discipline, we have two people essentially, or 2 or 3 people, right? So you can imagine like kind of what kind of, weird mix that becomes, but I think that's also quite unique and quite interesting. So that's about the center. And now let me kind of deep dive into the topic. So, I mean, I think this is kind of, was kind of driving the project, but I guess that's something, I'm not saying something new, like the evolution of like creative models have been astonishing in the last kind of 2.5 years essentially. Like, so just when we look at like the quality of these models, when like just the beginning of 2022, like it was kind of a pet thing. It was kind of funny, nice, also impressive, but like not really something you would think, okay, that's really going to change like kind of how we do creativity as humanity. like now we are in a situation where we're really like kind of thinking, okay, are these models even better than human artists in some say, whatever better means, obviously, but like, are they actually having capacity beyond humans in some sense? And really, really interesting here is that we have this linking between visual and linguistic concepts. So we have these multimodal models which are able to link between these different domains. And for our purpose, what is interesting here, that we are having like increasingly examples of human-machine culture. So where in some way humans and machines are working together to create actually cultural artifacts. So in this case, the human is kind of creating the prompt for the image. The human is also the source of the training data the model has been trained on. But then the machine is doing some magic in like doing a cultural integration, kind of taking all this training data together, interpret it, and together with the prompt creates these kind of images. So this is only one example of like machine culture, but in fact, there are like many others. So for instance, there was the instance of Go, where like an AI was having a new move not have previously been seen by a human, and that was really surprising. Like the first time like AlphaGo was winning it against a human player, like, okay, there's this machine which can win against a human, but it's not only winning against humans, it's also playing very different than humans. And what we then subsequently saw that actually humans are imitating the way these algorithms are working, playing. So if you now compare games of Go, they look more and more like algorithms play. So really like humans adopting this kind of behavior. We also, of course, have a lot of discussions about how recommender systems are influencing us in many ways, like polarization and so you name it. But I mean, I think there's still like kind of a heated discussion about this topic, but we definitely think that these systems have an influence on us, on human culture. And now we have these large language models. I think we're still like in the moment of understanding what's the impact of those. But what I really think is like that they are going to transform education in one way or the other. I mean, I personally learn a lot from ChatGPT, and I think a lot of people do. So as we have this kind of new source of knowledge, like this will definitely also influence us in one way or the other. So in order to kind of anticipate how all these new technologies will change actually culture, I think it's useful to take in a theoretical framework. So a theoretical framework allows you to kind of conceptualize things and kind of allows you then to kind of make some kind of predictions. And the theoretical framework we like to use is culture evolution. Culture evolution essentially has like 3 components. So it has variation, selection, and transmission. So new cultural traits are created. That's the variation part. Then there is some kind of preference-driven selection. So individuals prefer some traits over others. And there's the transmission. So that just like kind of means like some cultural traits are maintained through generation by mechanisms such as social learning. And so we kind of thought, okay, like, can we use this framework to understand how machines might influence human culture? So that's kind of we wrote this down recently, and we actually think that machines will impact all of these 3 components. So we will have situations where machines will create new cultural artifacts. We just saw an example just before. We have situations where machines are very much involved in the transmission. So for instance, ChatGPT is like a tool which essentially learns from humans, but then also influences humans. So it's very much in this process of like, when you use ChatGPT as in education, it is actually a tool for cultural transmission between the training data, which was human, and the person who's like then using ChatGPT as a teacher, essentially. And at the same time, machines also influence selection. So if you think of a recommender engine, it's kind of pre-filtering kind of selecting for you your cultural consumption. But we also think that there's kind of the opposite direction where we humans will select between machines and thereby also drive basically the evolution of chatbot. I think of like different companies now competing on the market of like who has the most helpful chatbot, and like certain kind of behaviors will probably be just kind of maintained in chatbots just because the customer expects that kind of behavior from the model. So today I will talk mainly about the first part, so machines creating novel cultural traits, and then towards the end I will have a little bit of an outlook of like this selection idea of like, okay, machines might be selected, humans might select between different machines. So now coming back to text-to-image generative AI, these models have been trained on huge repertoires of human knowledge. So you could also think of them as a model of human culture. But in a way, they're static. So they're a model of human culture, but they are somehow like a snapshot of human culture. So in general, you wouldn't expect like a model like Stable Diffusion to have an understanding of like how the cultural process within humanity works. So essentially like how in over hundreds of years or over the last, maybe also not only the last 100 years, kind of maybe an artistic movement developed, right? Like this kind of dynamic perspective is missing in these models. And the question is like, okay, can we bring in this dynamic dimension? And yeah, can we understand like how actually our culture evolves using these tools? And the focus here is mainly on recombination as one source of cultural variation. And there's some arguing that like recombination is a major source of human creativity. So it's not like that kind of niche idea. And why are we kind of, or what is maybe the underlying motivation to pursue this research is like, okay, so like basically the question of like how do we progress in cultural evolution in the age of AI. So when we think about like the pre-AI time, like we had kind of some kind of cumulative increase in cultural complexity. If you just kind of think of like artifacts and cultural ideas kind of just cumulatively coming together. And now we have these generative AI models, and there's some argument that they add to variation. They like allow a lot of new things to happen, but we might be constrained by like some kind of for instance the prompt space. So how do we actually, if now everyone is just using like generative AI and no one is painting anymore, right? Because you don't get paid for it. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but just assume like for the sake of the argument, but no one gets paid for creating any cultural artifact anymore because we all like use these tools. Like who's actually bringing in the novelty into these models? So there's kind of the idea that we could in the end kind of stagnate because like, well, we have these new tools that can create a lot of stuff, but once we have exhausted prompt space, we don't know what to do next, essentially. And so that's maybe kind of the underlying motivation why it makes sense to think of these kind of things. So in a way, I would like here to kind of have like two perspectives on AI, rather than said like using AI to understand human culture evolution, but also then kind of doing the other version, saying like using culture evolution to build AI systems. Okay, let's go back to Stable Diffusion. We all have played around with these models, and essentially when you just give the same prompt, but you give like, say, okay, I want to have it in the style of Vincent van Gogh or the style of like Giorgio or Kefi, like you will get very different outputs, right? So the model has some understanding of like what is a style. Now, the problem, like in the way the model is usually working, is that you have the prompt and it's tokenized, and then when you have like a style for Vincent van Gogh, for instance, you will get like at least 3 different tokens. I mean, it might be even more because tokenizers don't just clip on the words; they also go like subwords. So you might end up with like some number of tokens, and then those tokens are jointly interpreted, and then they create and these images. Now, that's great, but the problem, as I said, is like, first of all, we have like now 3 tokens kind of representing the style. And secondly, it's a little bit uncontrolled. We rely on Stable Diffusion to have some kind of understanding of the artists we care about. But in practice, this works for some artists quite well, like for instance, Vincent van Gogh. But for like less well-known artists, it's like more like so-so results. So luckily, there's like a method called textual inversion, and that essentially just allows to do the inverse. So you give to the model a set of example images, and then you say, okay, give me a vector which basically recreates this example image I give to the model. So you give it like a prompt template, but you have a placeholder in this template. In this case, it's Go. Well, I mean, it's just a random initialized vector, right? Like you don't make any assumption in this moment, and then you just say, okay, what kind of vector would be the best to recreate the example images I'm giving? And yeah, the nice thing is here that we now just get like one very well-defined vector for the specific artist. So the images we used here are from Wiki Art, so we know exactly, okay, we put in these images, and this is the result. Yeah, well, this is actually the result. So now here I have like 10 different artists, the same prompt, and yeah, we really see that how, yeah, these different vectors very much determine the final output, and like the model is really quite sensitive to these style vectors. Now that's cool. So we have these vectors, and the first thing we did there was like, okay, let's kind of do some basic descriptive analysis, like what are these vectors actually we are looking at. And here on the left side, we did a PCA. So we embedded these vectors in 2 dimensions, and the color is the median year of the artworks in our data set. And we really see like that there is, in this embedding space, there is an evolution in time. So on the lower left corner, we are like in the 14th century, and yeah, up to contemporary artists. What I think distinguishes this method from other methods which allow to like kind of create embeddings from images is that you always can easily go like from the embedding space into the image space, and so I mean, actually that direction is much easier. So so now we also computed like a rolling average of these vectors, and we can kind of compute these kind of prototypical images of the different points of time. So this is great, but we want to have a model, right? We want to understand, or like at least we want to understand a little bit better what is happening here. And so one question we asked first was like, okay, are we looking at recombinations? So are like arts, is like a new art just like a recombination of 2 previous art styles, or are we actually seeing some kind of expansion of a convex source? So basically, like a new art is always is outside of existing art, but kind of always pushing the boundaries essentially. And yeah, so the answer is kind of both. So first of all, let's talk about recombination. So we kind of fitted a model where we said, okay, like let's assume like a new art is always a linear combination of previous arts, and so it's just like a basically linear regression, but each individual art has its own regression, but with like a L1 regularization. And when we look at these weights, we see, yeah, I mean, they're non-zero, which is kind of not surprisingly, but also we see this kind of concentration across the diagonal. So that means essentially that according to this model, like artists are more influenced by contemporary artists, which is kind of what we saw also in the plot before when we just looked at the colors. So it's always important to remember that this is, although we thought about it as like kind of direct influence in terms of like, okay, that artist might have seen that other artist and stuff like that. It's like the model itself cannot really talk about whether it's like direct influence, so they really know each other, or it's something like zeitgeist. So like there's some kind of hidden influence which is not described by the model, which kind of influence different artists in the same period. Or also like there's always correlation base, which is important to know for these kind of models. But then there's also the other approach, which is the expansion of the convex hull. So we basically computed the convex hull. So that's kind of this space which is covered, like the smallest space you can basically, if you think about putting like a balloon around your points, what's the volume of this balloon? And what we found is that this volume of this balloon around our data points is increasing over time, and that's not just like if we shuffle. It's not just because we have more points, right? Like, I mean, of course, if we have more points, like randomly the volume would increase, but if we just shuffle the data point and just like do the same thing, then we also get an increase by many magnitudes smaller decrease. So again, what we already saw before in the plot is basically like new arts are not in the same space than old art. Like, you know, like you see really this expansion of the space. And what we also kind of see from this is like new art is not just sampled in between old art. So essentially, yeah, there's really something like creative innovation, at least from the perspective of this data set. So with this, I will like kind of finish this more descriptive part and kind of go a bit to the outlook of like what is our plan with this, but it's still like very much ongoing. So what we're actually kind of looking at, we want to understand like how will these kind of hybrid cultural ecosystems look like. So what I already mentioned before is like we expect like humans will exert exogenous pressure on machines to generate culturally appealing artifacts. So what I mean by that is like when you use like some methods like reinforcement learning with human feedback, like there will be some kind of pressure on the machine to kind of create whatever the human on the screen is like wants to see, essentially, right? And I mean that can be within these organizations, but that can also be just like that between organization, between models, that like as mentioned before, that just like those organizations and machines making the most appealing methods will be eventually succeeding, right? And so there's a pressure of like Midjourney to create like images which are very appealing, which people really like, so more people use their tools and so on. And essentially, the question is, okay, what will be the results for this kind of this kind of race towards appeal? Not so much the result, I guess, but what we are now looking at is like just kind of what are adaptive strategies to succeed in this race, and is recombination an adaptive strategy as a creative agent? And I mean, in a way, that's independent from the question if that's like a machine or a human, right? Like a human artist is facing the same question, like how do I produce art which is going to be sold on the market? Like so it's not really like specific to machines, but yeah, maybe in one way it's maybe exaggerate when you think about machines, but on the other hand, it's also that sometimes if you study something you build, you understand actually the real thing, right? Like it happened a lot in between, like there's a lot of back and forth in psychology between people building neural networks and people studying the brain, right? And there's kind of this mutual like these two fields were very kind of mutual, like fruitful for each other. And I think the same will now happen with social science, where we build like intelligent agents, and that will, like, on the one hand side, like, yeah, we get better in building intelligent agents, but we will also understand better how human society works, essentially. And so that's kind of what we're thinking about. And now what we're doing here in practice is we want to use Markov chains with these agents, which I described before. So we will have Markov chains with like creative agents, which are sampling in this in this style space. So each agent will have a specific style. So maybe they start with Van Gogh and then they will drift, I don't know, to Andy Warhol at some point or whatever. So these agents will each represent a specific creative style, and we are looking at, okay, which kind of processes are most adaptive for these creative agents. So at the moment, we have two different types of agents. On one hand side, agents which jump discrete between historic styles, essentially. So the agent will just like jump exactly from Van Gogh to, I don't know, Rembrandt. So it really just like does this kind of discrete jumps. And we have the other agent, which is able to do these kind of recombinations, where the agent is able to mix between different styles. And what we're then interested in is if we are running these chains and there's essentially some kind of competition between these agents. So we will like there will be an experiment with humans. We are asking them, okay, which of the two images do you like more? And essentially, like one will be from agent A and one will be from agent B. Then we eventually can see, okay, over a longer period of time, like how is the distribution of agents looking like? So do we see that over time, one type of agent is going to outcompete the other type of agent? So that's the final, that's kind of the experimental design we're aiming for. Now, the whole thing is more complicated in practice, as usually. I also thought it was maybe a great space to also talk about challenges. So we have now this agent, and like what we first tried is like just really a completely random walk in the style space, but that really didn't work well. So what we now, as I said before, we were focusing on recombinations, but even that is not necessarily trivial. So now like a style is kind of sparse, is the multiplication between these kind of different vectors from different artists with some sparse vector, which is indicating which of the different artists we are now kind of recombining. And then we just have a sampler which kind of moves this around these ones here, like basically the activations of the different artists. So like kind of we're changing which artists we are in, like kind of combining together essentially. And in order to so in general that worked well, but what we saw in earlier the situation was that we need to replace an artist always with an artist which is kind of similar. So if we just replace it with a random artist, we get a very, very diffuse walk, which is not really good for MCMC. So you need some kind of more gradual change. So what we then did, basically, we always say, okay, we replace an artist with another artist, which is more or less similar to the previous one. So like similar, like in the vicinity, in the neighborhood of the previous artist. And then we get these kind of chains, what you see here on the plot. But now coming to the problem, what we more recently then realized is actually when we do this similarity, like replacing or like kind of sampling artists by always moving from one artist to the next one based on like some kind of similarity measure. Wherever we started in our space, we always ended up on those artists which were like most ancient. So we always moved like basically backward in time. And that was like kind of puzzling for us, like because like we were not enforcing that, right? Like we didn't have any kind of, we didn't get any temporal direction. We just always said, okay, I'm based on one artist, I'm looking for another artist which is somehow in my neighborhood, and I'm jumping to that artist, like with the probability of this jump being proportional basically to the similarity of that artist. So what we then also tested, okay, if we kind of put the space down to one dimension, then we don't have that problem. So then we really like just kind of move nicely. And what we finally figured out was actually that the space has an interesting structure in terms of that the cosine similarity of artists is much higher. So the artists which are older, much more similar within this data set at least. So essentially you have some kind of, I'm always thinking like this of like kind of like a tree structure or something like that, where essentially we have some seeding culture and then there's a cultural expansion in many different directions, right? So you can think of that like if you then make a random walk on this tree, you're always much more likely to end up in the trunk, right? Like if you think of a tree and you start on a leaf and you make a random walk, you're quite likely to end up in the trunk and not on another leaf, right? Because somehow you have this structure of the space. At least that's the way I kind of visualize it at the moment. That was kind of where at the moment like kind of thinking. I mean, maybe we just do the one-dimensional one, but it was just something I found interesting that there is this kind of somehow very specific structure of the space which leads like a random walk, ending up always in the same spot essentially. So I think that's kind of what we understood so far about this embedding space, and I can just quickly summarize. So AI influences variations, transmission, selection of human culture. Generative AI, I think, is a static model of human culture. Like, can we build dynamic models? Can we build models which are not just showing how culture is now, but how culture is tomorrow also? And recombination seems to be one part of the cultural process, but there's also an expansion of the convex whole. And finally, can we somehow build in culture evolution into generative AI? That's kind of the big question without answer.
Thank you. I will stop the recording.